Dawn arrives reluctantly on the coast of Lindisfarne, 793 CE. The sea lies flat and silent beneath a heavy blanket of fog, a cold, grey veil that blurs the line between water and sky. The monastery perches on a wind-lashed promontory, its walls damp with morning dew, stone fingers pointing toward heaven. Inside, monks move through their rituals, voices low, lips forming ancient prayers that drift into the salt-laden air. Their world is narrow and quiet, governed by the rhythm of bells and the measured pace of the liturgy. No one expects what is coming. No one imagines that within moments the world will tilt, and everything gentle will be swept away by a tide of violence that will echo for centuries. It begins as a faint, distant pulse, a sound so strange it takes a moment to notice. The monks look up from their psalms, puzzled. The beating grows louder, steadier, a thumping like the heartbeat of some vast, invisible beast. The fog thickens, obscuring the sea, swallowing color and distance. Then, suddenly, shapes emerge. Shadows resolve into long, narrow ships, their dragon-headed prows gliding silently through the mist. The vision is unreal, as if myth has slipped into the waking world. The oars rise and fall with perfect precision, splintering the stillness, each stroke a drumbeat of doom. On board, the men are unlike anything the monks have seen. Some are hulking figures swathed in shaggy bear pelts, their faces smeared with dark paint, eyes burning with a wild light. Others wear wolfskins, the snarling heads pulled over their brows. Their bodies are crisscrossed with scars and strange, painted patterns. Even at a distance, they radiate a raw energy that hints at something more than ordinary violence, a hunger for chaos that feels both ancient and inhuman. Before the monks can even cry out, the ships hit the shallows. Warriors leap into the surf, some howling like beasts, others moving with a chilling, predatory calm. A few drop to all fours and sprint up the sand, foaming at the mouth, biting the rims of their shields. Others stalk forward, grinning, silent, their gaze never leaving their prey. There is no warning, no negotiation. The attack explodes with savage efficiency. Steel flashes. Voices rise in panic, cut off by the crack of bone and the thud of axes. The sacred peace of the monastery shatters. Gold and relics are seized, but more than that, the invaders seem to take something deeper. Security, certainty, the illusion that the world is safe and orderly. The massacre at Lindisfarne marks the dawn of the Viking Age in Western memory, an event that will shape stories, laws, and nightmares for centuries to come. In that grey dawn, one question is born among the survivors, a question that will haunt all who hear it. What kind of men can do this? How do you face warriors who seem not just willing to die, but eager to become something monstrous in the name of battle? This is the beginning, not just of an age, but of a new kind of terror. For these are not ordinary raiders. Among them walk the Berserkers, men who fight with the fury of bears, feeling neither pain nor fear, smashing through lines as if the gods themselves move their arms. Alongside them are the Ulfhedner, wolf-coated, patient as shadows, striking with cold cunning, slipping away before the blood dries. Together they form the edge of the Viking sword, a living weapon designed not only to kill, but to break the mind and spirit of any who would resist. History records the riches they took and the churches they burned, but the greater legacy is written in the terror they inspired. For centuries, tales of these men, these warriors who blurred the line between man and beast, will ripple across Europe. Children will be warned not to stray too far from home, lest the wolf warriors come in the night. Lords will pray for walls high enough to keep out the berserkers' rage. Even hardened soldiers will shudder at the thought of facing foes who seem invulnerable to fire and iron. But behind the fear and the myth lies a deeper, stranger story. Who were these men really? Were they merely savages high on blood and madness? Or did they possess secrets that let them break through the ordinary limits of the human body and mind? Did they find ways, through ritual, training, or something darker, to become more than men when battle called? To find the answer, we must walk back into the northern mists and the cold, sharp world that made such warriors possible. We must ask not just how they fought, but why. What called them to transform, to hunt, to howl, to become the nightmares that history has never quite forgotten? This is the story of the most terrifying Viking warriors who ever lived. Their legend begins here. On a morning where the sun struggles to rise and the world as it was ends, forever the Vikings did not invent terror, but they understood how to wield it like an axe. Their reputation was not just built on strength or brutality, but on a carefully crafted image, a shadow that stretched far beyond the reach of their ships. Imagine a world where the news of a single raid could travel faster than any ship, carried on the lips of terrified survivors. The fear of Vikings became a force unto itself, working even before the first or dipped into water. Their raids seemed to appear out of nowhere. A fishing village, a monastery, a market town, each could wake to the sound of horns and the sight of sails. But not all Viking warriors inspired equal dread. Most were farmers and fishermen, called to battle by need or ambition. Yet among their ranks moved a different kind of fighter, men who became the sharp point of the blade, the shock troops who would open the way for the rest. These were the ones who seemed less like men and more like something forged from nightmares. To understand why these elite warriors inspired such fear, we need to look at the structure of a Viking raiding force. At its core was the ship, not just a vessel but a living, moving camp, carrying warriors and leaders from shore to shore. Each crew was a band of brothers, bound by loyalty, ambition, and the promise of reward. But within these crews, there were those who stood apart. Their presence was as much psychological as physical, the ones who painted their bodies, who wore animal skins, who trained to push beyond normal limits. These were the men other Vikings watched with both respect and caution. Terror was their weapon as surely as sword or spear. A Viking leader understood the value of breaking the enemy before the fight even began. When the dragon-headed ships appeared, it was not just their numbers or weapons that terrified, but the sense that what was coming was unstoppable, inevitable. Stories spread quickly, of warriors who felt no pain, who could not be killed, who fought with the madness of animals or the cold focus of hunters. Each telling grew in the imagination, turning these fighters into legends before battle was even joined. This was no accident. Viking war bands understood the power of image and story. They knew the right moment to unleash their shock troops, not at the end, but at the very start, to break the enemy's will and turn resistance into flight. The Berserkers and Ulfhedner were not simply thrown into battle. They were unleashed like living weapons, their very arrival designed to send fear rippling through enemy lines. It was a strategy as psychological as it was physical. For those facing a Viking raid, the experience was overwhelming. Imagine standing in a shield wall, heart pounding, when the first figures charge forward. Men larger than life, roaring, painted, foaming at the mouth, biting their shields, howling like beasts. Some run on all fours, some leap into the fray with no armor, trusting only in frenzy. Others prowl behind, cold-eyed and silent, scanning for weakness. Panic spreads before swords ever meet. Soldiers who might have held their ground against ordinary men find their courage cracking in the face of this onslaught. That was the point. The most effective Viking warriors were experts at turning fear into a weapon. They attacked not just the body, but the mind and spirit. When resistance broke, the victory was total. Plunder was easy, and fewer lives were lost on their own side. The tales that spread afterward only increased their reputation for supernatural power, making the next raid even more effective. Yet this terror was not just for outsiders. Within the Viking ranks, these elite fighters held a strange place, admired for their skill, yet feared for their unpredictability. They trained differently, lived differently, sometimes standing apart even within their own band. Their rituals were secret, their loyalties sometimes strange. Leaders both prized and distrusted them, knowing that while their presence could win a battle, their rage could just as easily turn inward if not carefully controlled. This is the heart of what made the Berserkers and Ulfhedner more than just strong fighters. They became a kind of psychological technology, a way to turn the raw fear that lives in every human heart into a weapon that worked at a distance. Their presence in the vanguard was the promise of chaos, of boundaries broken, of something wild and unknowable surging forward. No wall was strong enough, no gate high enough, no prayer certain enough to stop them once they were unleashed. Other cultures had their own versions of elite warriors, but few weaponized fear so completely. The Vikings understood the mind as a battlefield, and they sent their shock troops to fight there first. This combination of myth and muscle, of story and strategy, became one of the most powerful forces in their arsenal. But where did these men come from? What was their training, their belief, their daily life like? How did someone become the point of the spear, the source of all those whispered tales? To understand the most terrifying Viking warriors, we must look closer at their roots, at the forces that shaped them, and at the dark places from which they drew their strength. Their story is not just one of muscle and steel, but of the hidden ways fear and awe can be twisted into something even more dangerous, a legend that lives, even as the world changes around it. The name alone, Berserker, holds a kind of power, sharp and strange on the tongue. Its meaning is debated even now, more than 1,000 years since those wild warriors last howled on a northern battlefield. Some say it means bare shirt, others bare shirt, but all agree it speaks of transformation, of men who put aside the normal skin of humanity and wore something far older, wilder, and more dangerous when they went to war. To the people of the north, the bear was not just a beast but a symbol: strength, ferocity, stubborn will, and a connection to something larger than any single life. Bears haunted their forests and their dreams. Their stories told of gods who changed shape and men who could do the same, blurring the boundaries between animal and human, between the world we see and the world that breathes beneath it. In that wild country, to claim the strength of the bear was to reach for something nearly sacred. Archaeologists have found hints of this old faith scattered across the north. Small, battered plates of metal, pressed into shapes that catch the light in odd ways, showing figures with round bodies, wide faces, and the unmistakable skins of bears draped over their shoulders. These were not decorations for ordinary people. They were hammered into helmets, sewn into cloaks, carried as signs that the wearer had stepped into a different kind of being. In ancient grave mounds, sometimes the bones of a man and a bear lie tangled together, as if to remind the living that the line is not so clear between man and beast. The earliest tales of berserkers flicker to life in the Old Norse sagas, those strange half-true, half-dream stories that hold the memory of an age when the gods still walked the earth. Snorri Sturluson, the great Icelandic historian, wrote that Odin, the high god, kept such men close to him, warriors who threw away their mail coats, who felt no steel and feared no fire, who charged into battle with the frenzy of dogs or wolves and the strength of bears. Their rage was not madness, but a gift, a force that made them more than ordinary mortals. But the sagas are not only tales of glory. There are hints of danger, of cost, and of fear even from their own people. The berserker was always a double-edged thing, admired and shunned, needed and distrusted. In a world where most men feared the wild and hoped to keep it at bay, the berserker welcomed it, drew it in, and let it rule him for a time. Some would say this made him braver, others would say it made him monstrous. For the ordinary farmer or fisherman, the idea of the berserker was both a hope and a threat. If one fought for you, it meant your side had the gods on its shoulder, that no wall could stand against such strength. But if a berserker lost control, friend and foe alike might suffer. Sagas whisper of feasts turned to bloodbaths, of men who could not turn off the wildness once it was awakened. Some communities made rules for how to deal with a berserker who went berserk at the wrong time. Outlawry, exile, or even death might follow if the wildness turned inward. In these stories, the bear shirt is more than a costume. It is a symbol of leaving behind the safe, bounded world of ordinary life and crossing into something older and less predictable. The transformation is physical, yes. Some went into battle nearly naked, trusting in their rage to protect them. Others wore the heavy hides of bears, thick enough to turn a blade, wild enough to frighten the heart. But the real change is inside. The sagas tell how a berserker's face would swell and darken, how he would shiver and foam at the mouth, how he would bite the rim of his shield and howl so that even the bravest would take a step back. But not all believed this was just theatre. There are hints of rituals, of secret dances by firelight, of herbs burned and strange songs sung, of young men taken into the woods and tested in ways no ordinary mind could endure. The line between training, belief, and something deeper is hard to see in the sagas. Some say the berserkers truly became bears for a time, wearing their spirit, drawing on its wildness until the boundaries of the self dissolved. This idea of transformation runs through all the old stories. In the Norse mind, nothing was entirely fixed. Gods changed shape. Men might too, if they were desperate or gifted enough. The bear shirt was a promise and a warning. Here is someone who is not bound by the ordinary rules, who has chosen, or been chosen, to walk close to the edge. For those outside this world, the tales of berserkers grew with each telling. Enemies described them as invincible, immune to pain, able to fight on when mortally wounded. Some thought them sorcerers, others, demons in human skin. What began as ritual and belief became legend and then fear, until the very idea of the bear shirt could chill the blood of those who had never even seen a Viking ship. The truth, as always, is tangled in the roots of myth and memory. The bear shirt endures because it touches something deep in us all, the longing to break through weakness, the fear of what waits in the wild, the fascination with those who walk in both worlds. The berserker's gift was not just to terrify others, but to remind everyone, friend and foe alike, that the boundary between man and beast is not as solid as we like to think. In the land of the North, that lesson was written in blood, in song, and in the skins of bears worn into battle. When the sagas speak of the berserkers, there is always a sense of the world shifting, of something ordinary cracking open to let the wild in. The berserker gang was not simply a temper or a mood. It was a force that swept over a man like a storm from the sea, sudden, powerful, and dangerous to anything in its path. When a berserker entered that state, the old laws of pain and fear no longer seemed to apply. He became something that frightened even his own people. The sagas did not have modern words for it, but the picture they draw is unmistakable. The start of the frenzy was marked by trembling, as if the man's body struggled to hold the power now flooding into it. His face would swell and redden, sometimes turning dark, his eyes wild, his breathing ragged and deep. He would begin to bite the rim of his shield, a habit so strange it was always mentioned, biting hard enough to leave marks, sometimes drawing blood, always watched with a mixture of respect and dread. There are tales of warriors foaming at the mouth, of their voices breaking into howls more animal than human. They might tear at their clothes or even strip them off entirely, trusting in their transformed state to protect them better than iron or leather. When the berserker charge began, it was chaos given human shape. They hurled themselves at the enemy, not with the discipline of a shield wall, but with the raw, unpredictable fury of something unleashed. In that moment, they seemed not to care about wounds. Arrows and blades that would drop other men glanced off or were ignored. They crashed through lines, smashed shields, and drove fear ahead of them like a second weapon. The sagas claim that fire and iron could not hurt a man in this state. This is not likely to be literally true. Many berserkers died in battle, but the point is not their actual invincibility. It is the effect of men who act as though they cannot be stopped. For those watching, that was sometimes enough to break the line before real fighting began. The Berserker gang, for all its terror, was not just madness. There was method and even training behind it. From youth, those who would become berserkers endured hardships that most could not imagine. They were tested in cold and hunger, taught to ignore pain, trained to fight until their muscles gave out. But the true secret of the berserker state was deeper still. It came from the mind, from belief, from rituals learned in the shadow of the forest or by the light of the hearth fire. Some drank strange brews or chewed herbs known only to a few. Others fasted or deprived themselves of sleep, heightening the senses and loosening the hold of the ordinary world. The moment of transformation was both feared and sought after. In some tales it came upon the berserker at will. In others it arrived unbidden, a gift or curse that could not be controlled. The men who mastered it became heroes, or monsters, or both. Those who could not control it might lose themselves entirely, attacking friends as well as foes, spending themselves in a burst of violence that left them weak and vulnerable after the rage faded. There is a science behind these stories, though the Vikings would not have known the words for it. Under great stress or excitement, the human body floods itself with chemicals, adrenaline, endorphins, that can mask pain, heighten strength, and narrow the mind to a single purpose. The Berserker gang was a way to ride this wave, to turn it from fear into power. In modern times, athletes and soldiers sometimes describe moments when the world seems to slow, pain disappears, and all that matters is the next movement, the next breath. For the berserkers, this was not a lucky accident but a skill, sharpened over years, until it could be called up like a storm. What makes the Berserker gang so strange and frightening, even now, is how close it brings a man to losing himself. In battle, it was a gift, a way to do what no ordinary fighter could do. But the cost was always waiting. When the rage passed, exhaustion followed. Some berserkers were said to collapse, unable to stand or even speak. Others wandered, dazed, unable to remember what they had done. The world returned, but not always in the same way. The line between man and beast had been crossed, and sometimes it did not close again. For those who faced them, the berserkers were the stuff of nightmare. It is one thing to fight another man, to know that he, like you, will flinch from pain and hesitate at death's edge. It is another thing to face someone who seems beyond such limits, who comes at you roaring, foaming, eyes wild, wounds ignored. Even the bravest could feel the cold touch of fear in such a moment. Armies broke, walls fell, because the mind gave way before the body ever did. The Berserker gang became legend, but it began as a tool, a way for certain men to reach past their fears, past the ordinary, and touch something wild. Whether it was magic, madness, or something deeper, it worked. The world has not forgotten those who could harness the frenzy, who could let it loose and ride its storm, even if it sometimes left them wrecked in its wake. The bare shirts of the North showed that within each man lies a door to the wild, and sometimes, for better or worse, that door can be flung wide open. To walk at night in the northern wilds is to know the feeling of being watched. The wind shivers through the trees, and every sound seems to carry a threat. For the Norse, this was the world that shaped their legends, the domain of wolves, of predators who hunted with patience and cunning. And among the Viking warriors, there were some who sought to claim this power for themselves. These were the Ulfhedner, the wolf skins, a brotherhood as old and strange as the shadows they called home. While the berserkers were storms, loud, reckless, and violent, the Ulfhedner were the silent threat, moving with purpose, blending in with the night. Their name comes from Ulfa, the Old Norse word for wolf, and hedon, meaning coat or skin. In the oldest tales, they wore wolf pelts into battle, sometimes even the heads as hoods, letting the muzzle hang over their faces. It was more than a costume. It was a statement, a claim that the line between man and beast could be blurred, if only for a little while. Their legend grows out of the Old Norse respect for the wolf, a creature both feared and honored, hunted and worshipped. Odin, the great god, was always in the company of his two wolves, Jerry and Freki. The wolves prowled through the stories of the North as symbols of hunger, of survival, of the untamed wildness that lived in every dark forest. It was said that the Ulfhedner served Odin's darker aspect, the one who guided hunters, not farmers, the one who welcomed the clever, the silent, and the merciless. Unlike the Berserkers, whose rage could shatter anything in their path, the Ulfhedner worked like the pack. Their fighting was not the chaos of the wild bear, but the methodical stalking of the wolf. They hunted together, moving with practiced ease, each man watching for the signal to strike. When battle came, they didn't roar or foam at the mouth. They waited. They circled. They struck where the enemy was weakest and retreated before the trap could close. Their discipline was almost unnatural, their silence unsettling. The sagas say that some Viking kings kept these wolf warriors as their personal guards, men who could be trusted not only for their skill, but for their control. Where Berserkers were sometimes too wild, too dangerous to keep close, the Ulfhedner offered a different kind of terror, the knowledge that the enemy might already be among you, hidden, patient, waiting for the right moment to act. They were scouts and spies, but also shock troops when the need arose. Their training, like the wolves, was long and hard. Young men who hoped to join their ranks went into the wild alone or in small groups. They learned to live off the land, to move without being seen, to sense the presence of others in the forest. Some tales say they spent nights howling at the moon, calling the animal spirit into themselves, hoping to break down the walls that kept men civilized and soft. There were rituals, secret and sacred, that bound them to each other and to their god. Sometimes, it is said, the line between man and wolf grew thin, and for a moment they walked on the other side. Archaeology has found traces of their existence. On helmet plates and stone carvings, figures are shown with wolf skins draped over their shoulders, sometimes with the wolf's head resting on the crown. In graves, the bones of wolves are sometimes found alongside the warrior dead, as if to guide them into the next world. These are not the graves of ordinary men. There is a sense of purpose in every item, a story in every carefully arranged relic. The Ulfhedner's power was not just in the fight, but in the fear they created. Enemies spoke of hearing howls in the night, of seeing eyes shine from the woods, of never knowing when the attack would come. It was as much about what could happen as what did happen. To face a pack of Ulfhedner was to wonder which shadow hid a killer, which silence was about to end. Their strength was multiplied by doubt and dread. They were not invincible, but their style of war left a lasting impression. Where Berserkers left shattered lines and broken shields, the wolf skins left confusion, stories, and the feeling of having been hunted. Even those who survived a raid found their sleep troubled, always listening for the next howl, always glancing over their shoulders. It was a different kind of terror, quieter but no less effective. Not every Viking understood or trusted the Ulfhedner. In the safety of the village, such men might be shunned, their loyalty always a little suspect, their ways too close to the wild. Yet in war, they were prized. A king with Ulfhedner at his side could sleep more easily, knowing his enemies would find no rest. A band of raiders led by a wolf skin might slip away with their loot before dawn, leaving only questions and a cold wind behind. The memory of the Ulfhedner lingers. Their names and deeds live on in the sagas, their shapes on ancient stones. They remind us that power takes many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one who shouts his rage, but the one who waits in the dark, as patient and silent as the wolf at the edge of the firelight. In the long nights of the north, their legend endures, part man, part beast, all shadow. No one was born a berserker or a wolf skin. These men were made, shaped by cold, hunger, pain, and ambition, to become one of the terrifying warriors who led Viking raiding bands or stood at a king's side took more than strength or courage. It required a transformation, slow and deliberate, that began long before any battle was ever fought. The making of these elite fighters started in childhood, often before a boy's voice had even deepened. In the harsh lands of the north, there was little comfort, and the lessons of survival came quickly. Life was a series of tests, and only the toughest passed. From an early age, future warriors were set apart. Maybe there was something different in their blood, or maybe it was simply a stubborn refusal to give up when others would break. Some were chosen, marked by their families for greatness or oddness, or noticed by elders who saw a spark of wildness that could be fanned into flame. Whatever the reason, the first step was always physical. Boys were sent to swim in freezing water, to run barefoot across sharp stones, to sit naked in the snow and prove they would not yield to pain or cold. The North punished the weak, and these boys learned to welcome that punishment as a test. Training in weapons began almost as soon as a child could lift a stick. The sagas speak of contests, friendly at first, but soon more serious, where boys would strike at each other with wooden swords or wrestle in the mud until one yielded. As they grew, the weapons became heavier and the blows more real. To be marked as one who could take a hit and keep fighting was to win respect, and every bruise or scar was a badge of honor. If a young warrior could not keep up, he fell behind and was forgotten. But strength alone was not enough. The mind needed to be sharpened as much as the blade. Endurance meant not just surviving hardship, but learning to find calm in chaos, to stay alert and focused even when hungry, cold, or afraid. Those who wished to join the ranks of the Berserkers or Ulfhedner often spent long periods alone, fasting, meditating, or wandering in the wilderness. These were times to face their own fears and doubts, to let go of comfort and security, to become used to living at the edge of what was possible. Initiation into these warrior cults was not a single event but a journey, a series of rituals and trials that changed a man from the inside out. There are hints in the sagas and in the findings of archaeologists: animal skins laid on new initiates, chants sung by firelight, secret herbs burned or eaten, all designed to loosen the hold of the ordinary and open the mind to something older and wilder. In some tales, the young men were brought together to dance or fight in ways that mimicked the animal they would become, howling or moving in packs, learning to think and move as one. To be part of a brotherhood, to trust and be trusted absolutely, was crucial. Alone, a man could be dangerous. Together, they were unstoppable. Some say that true transformation required a vision or an ordeal, a moment when the old self died and the new one was born. This could happen in a night-long vigil, in the grip of fever or exhaustion, or even in the terror of battle. Those who returned were changed. Their eyes seemed to burn a little brighter, their movements grew more certain, their voices steadier and deeper. Friends and family might say they recognized the man, but there was something different, a coldness or a calm, or a wild edge just beneath the surface. The making of a berserker or a wolf skin was not just about what they gained, but what they gave up. Comfort was surrendered for strength. Fear was faced and forced down until it no longer ruled them. The line between man and animal blurred, and while most could step back, there were always a few who lost themselves in the process. Some never found their way home. It is easy to imagine that these warriors were simply mad, or that their rituals were only superstition. But the results cannot be argued. On the battlefield, These men moved and fought with a purpose and intensity that terrified even their allies. Their enemies saw them and broke. It was not just physical might or technique, but the certainty, the deep belief, forged in sleepless nights and icy waters, that nothing could stop them. The transformation was real because they believed it was real, and because everyone who faced them believed it too. The making of such men took everything: body, mind, and spirit. They were forged in the harshest fires, shaped by loss, hardship, and the endless challenge of the northern world. Even now, we struggle to understand how far a person can go when pushed by need and guided by belief. The story of the Berserkers and Ulfhedner is not just one of violence or terror. It is the story of human potential stretched to its breaking point, of the price paid to become something more, or less, than human, and the shadows left behind when the fire burns out. There are moments in battle when the world seems to narrow to a single point. Pain vanishes, fear dissolves, and time itself stretches or collapses. Some call it flow, others frenzy, and the Vikings had their own word for it: Berserker gang. Today we might look for explanations in the body and the mind, but to the warriors of the North, it was a kind of magic, something that lifted a man out of himself and made him more than human for a short and terrible while. The line between myth and science is never clear in stories of the Berserkers. Old tales describe men who became invulnerable, who could not be wounded by iron or burned by fire, who tore through shields and walls as if they were made of straw. They bit their shields, howled, and crashed forward without hesitation, blind to everything but the battle itself. The more modern mind looks for reasons in chemistry and biology, in ritual and belief. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, tangled up like roots in dark earth. The first thing to understand is that the body, when pushed to the edge, can do things that seem impossible. Under the right stress, the brain unleashes a storm of chemicals: adrenaline, endorphins, cortisol, that change how we feel, think, and move. Pain is muted. Muscles pull harder. Fear still exists, but it's buried under a wave of energy and focus. Soldiers and athletes sometimes speak of moments when they moved without thinking, when their actions felt automatic and unstoppable. For the Berserkers, this was not a rare accident but a goal, something they trained to reach and sustain. How did they get there? Some clues come from the rituals described in the sagas. Fasting, sleeplessness, isolation, each one a tool for breaking down the old self and building up something new. In the forests or on the freezing shores, warriors learned to push past exhaustion, to stay alert through long nights, to embrace discomfort until it became normal. Their training was physical, but it also worked on the mind, teaching them to trust their bodies and lose themselves in the moment. But there were other secrets, too. The Old Norse were no strangers to the world of plants and potions. Some sagas and later scholars suggest that certain mushrooms, red-capped and white-spotted, the famous fly agaric, might have played a part. These mushrooms, if prepared and consumed in just the right way, could bring strange visions, surges of energy, and a sense of being outside one's own skin. Other plants, like henbane or bog myrtle, were also known for their effects on the mind. Used carelessly, these substances could kill. Used with skill, they might open doors to altered states. Modern science tells us that the effects of these plants can match some of the descriptions found in the sagas: tremors, strength, wild mood swings, even numbness to pain. But drugs alone are never the whole story. The real magic comes when belief, ritual, and physical readiness combine. In the right mind, with the right training, a person can do things that would seem impossible under normal circumstances. Group rituals played a role as well. Before battle, warriors might gather to chant, to drum, to move in rhythm. These rituals did more than build excitement. They synchronized hearts and minds, created a sense of unity, and allowed each man to lose himself in the mass. The fear and anticipation that build before a fight can become overwhelming, but in the right context, that energy is channeled, not suppressed. This is the real heart of the battle trance, surrendering to something bigger than oneself, whether that is the spirit of a bear, a wolf, a god, or simply the force of the group. The result was a kind of controlled madness, a space where the ordinary rules did not apply. Wounds could be ignored, limits pushed, and the difference between life and death became less important than the act of fighting itself. There was danger in this, of course. Not every man could find his way back. The sagas are filled with stories of berserkers who lost themselves forever, who could not control when the frenzy came or left, who became threats to their own people when the battle ended. Today, we recognize some of these states in stories from soldiers or survivors of disaster. Times when people perform impossible feats, when pain and doubt disappear, and only the next action matters. Scientists study these moments, looking for ways to help athletes and fighters reach them safely and return unchanged. But the Vikings did it without laboratories or books, relying on experience, tradition, and the old ways of their ancestors. In the end, the battle trance was both a gift and a curse. It made ordinary men into legends, but it came at a price. For those who could master it, even for a short time, there was nothing more powerful. For those who could not, the shadows sometimes claimed them. The Berserkers and Ulfhedner teach us that the line between myth and science is not always sharp, and that the greatest transformations come when mind, body, and belief move together, pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human. In the ancient North, the world was alive in ways that modern eyes struggle to see. Every shadow and storm, every tree and animal, was thought to carry a spirit. The line between what was living and what was sacred blurred until the gods themselves seemed close enough to touch. For the warriors of the Viking Age, this was not a world to conquer, but a world to join, a place where power could be borrowed if you were bold or desperate enough. The Norse gods were not distant kings in the sky, but unpredictable forces woven into the land and sea. Odin, the All-Father, was the master of secrets, wisdom, and madness. He was the god of war, but also of poetry and prophecy. He was said to wander the earth in disguise, trading an eye for knowledge, hanging himself from the world tree to learn the runes, sending his soul out in animal form while his body lay as if dead. The sagas say his followers learned these arts as well, and among them, none were closer to his mysteries than the Berserkers and Ulfhedner. To the Viking mind, what we call a state of mind was a kind of spiritual possession. To become a bear or a wolf in battle was not just play acting or ritual, but a genuine crossing over, a letting in of the animal spirit, or perhaps of Odin himself. The warriors wore skins not just as protection or symbol, but as invitations. Each time they donned the pelt, they stepped into a different self, leaving behind the world of ordinary men. The Norse had a word for this power, hammer. It meant the shape or skin a person wore, but it was also the soul's ability to travel, to shift, to change. In some stories, a man with a strong enough will could send his spirit out in another form, see with the eyes of a wolf or a bird, even fight in battle while his body slept. The term hamramer described those who were strong in shape, those who could shift their being, sometimes without warning, sometimes by choice. This idea gave rise to both awe and fear. Warriors who could tap into this power seemed to move beyond normal limits, but they also risked losing themselves. There was always the chance that something else might come back in their place, or that the change might stick. The line between blessed and cursed, between hero and monster, was dangerously thin. In the sagas, berserkers are sometimes celebrated as Odin's chosen and sometimes hunted as outlaws or monsters. Ritual and belief bound these warriors to the gods and the animal world. Before battle, the warriors might call upon Odin with prayers, chants, or sacrifices. They sang the old songs, burned herbs that filled the air with a biting, earthy scent, and wore charms carved with runes of power. Some rituals were secret, known only to the initiated, passed down from elder to apprentice. Others were public, designed to stir courage and remind everyone present that the gods watched and judged each act of bravery or cowardice. Animal spirits were everywhere in the Old Norse world. The raven, Odin's messenger, circled the fields of battle. The wolf haunted the forests and the edges of settlements, at once a symbol of danger and a teacher of endurance. Even the act of eating certain foods or taking on a new name could be a way of drawing the spirit of an animal closer, seeking its strength, its cunning, or its indifference to pain. Possession, in this worldview, was not something to be feared so long as it served a purpose. It was a tool, a blessing, even a requirement for certain kinds of greatness. A man who entered the Berserker state was said to be gripped by Odin. He was dangerous, yes, but also revered. His body was a vessel for something much larger and older than himself. Friends and enemies alike recognized that in these moments the rules of normal life did not apply. But this power came with a cost. The warriors who dared to invite the spirits inside sometimes lost control, becoming threats to their own people. In the stories, there are warnings about those who go too far, who lose the thread of their own selves in the ecstasy of battle. The community might celebrate their victories, but they also watched closely, ready to act if the wildness bled over into peace. This way of seeing the world faded as new beliefs spread, but the echoes remain. Even today, we talk of finding our animal side, of being possessed by an idea, or channeling the spirit of something greater. The Old Norse warriors remind us that for much of human history, the boundary between the natural and supernatural was as thin as a morning mist. The Viking worldview was not about conquering fear, but about making it an ally, learning to call forth the bear or the wolf, to invite the gods to ride alongside in battle, to trust that the world was alive and willing to lend its power to those who dared to ask. For a brief moment, under grey skies and beside cold seas, they succeeded, and the world has not forgotten. What remains of a legend when the words fade and the storytellers are gone? In the case of the Viking Age, the ground itself keeps secrets, cold, silent, and heavy with meaning. If you walk the old fields of Scandinavia or the islands where the Northmen landed, you can still find echoes of the men who wore bear shirts and wolf skins. Archaeology has become the quiet voice that confirms or challenges what the sagas tell. It uncovers the world as it was, untouched by memory's blur. Over time, the mounds and barrows of the north have given up their dead. Archaeologists have found graves filled with weapons, axes, swords, shields, buried with men who lived hard and died young. But there are other clues that speak more directly to the legend of the Berserkers and Ulfhedner. In some graves, the bones of animals rest beside the warrior, not as food for the afterlife, but as companions. The claws of bears, the fangs and skulls of wolves, carefully placed as if to mark the connection between the fallen man and the animal spirit he had claimed in life. Metalwork tells its own stories. In Sweden, from the 7th century, tiny plates known as the Torslanda helmets show figures dancing in what can only be described as ritual ecstasy. Men with bare skins draped over their shoulders, captured mid-movement, muscles tensed, mouths open in a silent roar. Other plates reveal men in wolf pelts, standing among spears, their faces masked, their bodies poised to spring. These images are not random decoration. They are snapshots of ritual, of transformation, frozen in metal for generations to see. On the island of Gotland, standing stones bear images of warriors unlike any others. Some hold weapons, but others seem to be in the midst of some ceremony, surrounded by symbols, runic spirals, animal heads, the looping knots of Norse art. There is a sense that battle and the spirit world were not far apart. Every line cut into the stone is a reminder that these stories meant something deep to the people who carved them. Archaeologists have uncovered sites where rituals seem to have taken place. At a site in Uppland, Sweden, bare bones were found split and scattered around a hearth, mixed with human remains and weapons. This was not a feasting place, but a place where boundaries were tested and maybe crossed. Other finds include amulets in the shape of bears or wolves, tucked into graves or found at the entrances to ancient homes. These small objects hint at the hope, or the fear, that the power of the animal could be carried or worn, protecting the living or marking out the special dead. Skeletal evidence offers another window. Some warriors' bones show signs of unusual strength, dense, thickened arms and shoulders, twisted slightly from years of repetitive weapon training. Some show healed wounds that would have ended the lives of ordinary men. Their teeth are sometimes broken, perhaps from the habit of biting shields, perhaps from a lifetime of grit and hunger. A few skulls show signs of strange deformities, thickened brows or enlarged jaws, that seem to fit the saga descriptions of men who changed in body as well as mind. Yet for all these finds, there is always mystery. Not every grave yields a bear claw or a wolf tooth. Not every stone carving can be linked to a specific tale. Some archaeologists are cautious, warning that our hunger for legend can make us see what is not there. Perhaps a bear bone was only a trophy, or a wolf pelt a sign of status. But taken together, the pattern is hard to ignore. Across the north, the lines between warrior and animal, between battle and ritual, are drawn again and again. Written records from the enemies of the Vikings add another layer. Monks in England and Ireland wrote in terror of men who fought like wild beasts, and strange warriors in skins, impervious to sword or fire. Arab travelers recorded tales of warriors who howled before battle, who showed no fear, and who seemed to change their nature under the eyes of their gods. These stories, written by those who suffered at their hands, have a different kind of truth. They show the power of the image, the way fear could cross languages and oceans. Sometimes, what is missing speaks as loudly as what is found. In later centuries, after the coming of Christianity, animal bones vanish from graves, and the old images are replaced by crosses. Laws appear, making it a crime to go berserk, and stories shift from awe to warning. The archaeological record shows the slow fading of a world where warriors became beasts, and where the line between myth and life was dangerously thin. But dig deep enough, and the clues remain. Under layers of earth and centuries of change, the bones of bear and man still lie together. The metal plates still shine with old images. The stones still remember the shape of the ritual. Through these fragments, the past whispers. These men were real, their world as wild and strange as any tale. The legend of the most terrifying Viking warriors is written not just in words, but in the earth beneath our feet. It's easy to talk about terror in the abstract, to imagine what it must have been like to face a Viking raid. But only on the battlefield do the legends come alive, painted in sweat, blood, and panic. The Berserker's true gift, what set him apart from every other fighter, was his ability to break the line, to shatter the illusion of safety and order. In the age of the shield wall, when armies met in tight ranks, nothing was more precious than discipline. It was the line that made men strong. It was also the line that the Berserker was born to break. In those days, battles did not begin as sudden chaos. Armies faced each other in ordered rows, shields locked edge to edge, spears bristling above the wall of wood and iron. The shield wall was a fortress made of men, a test of will as much as strength. Its power came from unity, from each man trusting his neighbor to stand fast. For most warriors, survival depended on holding the line, matching the rhythm of the men around them, fighting in step. The Berserker, however, brought a different rhythm. When the call to arms rang out, He did not wait for orders. He surged forward, roaring, his eyes wide and strange, mouth flecked with spit. Sometimes he would fling away his shield, as if it were a thing for weaker men. He might leap or crawl, rush or circle, swinging his axe or sword with a force that seemed inhuman. Even among Vikings, who valued bravery above all, the Berserkers' charge stood out, a kind of wild, reckless courage that mocked the careful discipline of the shield wall. Imagine being one of the men in that line. You are steady, your shoulder pressed to your comrades, your heart pounding with fear and hope. Then you see him, a figure draped in bare skin, face painted, shield bitten and battered, screaming as if possessed. He closes the distance with terrifying speed. Where others might hesitate at the wall of shields, he does not slow. He slams into the line, swinging wildly, not caring if he is cut or stabbed, not caring if he bleeds. His rage is a weapon, and it spreads faster than any wound. Discipline is fragile. It lives in the mind, fed by trust and order. When the berserker crashes in, men feel that order cracking. Shields splinter. Gaps open. The men nearest him falter, some stepping back, some turning aside, no longer certain that the wall can hold. And that is enough. The shield wall needs every man. One gap, one break, and the whole thing can collapse. Panic is more contagious than bravery, and the sight of a man who cannot be stopped is sometimes all it takes to turn a battle. Stories from the sagas and enemy chronicles speak of berserkers who tore through multiple foes, who seemed to ignore wounds that would kill ordinary men. Some were said to uproot trees, to throw aside armed opponents, to fight until their bodies failed. There are tales of berserkers who were still fighting after being pierced by spears, who fell only when utterly spent. Their fury was not mindless. It was focused, directed at the weak points, the edges, the places where the shield wall was already under strain. The psychological shock was as deadly as any weapon. Few soldiers, no matter how well trained, could watch a berserker approach and not feel a chill. The stories had already done their work, planting fear long before the first blow. Enemies knew these were no ordinary men. They were said to be immune to iron, to fire, to fear. Some warriors would try to avoid them, steering away from the place where the bare shirts raged. Others might break and run, spreading panic through their own ranks. Viking leaders used berserkers as living battering rams. When resistance was strong, when a gate would not yield or a line would not break, they unleashed the bare shirts. It was a tactic as old as war. Send the wildest, the most terrifying, against the point of greatest resistance and let fear do the rest. Sometimes it failed, and the berserker died. But often the line broke, and with it, the will to fight. After the fury faded, the cost became clear. Berserkers often collapsed where they stood, spent and helpless, wounds pouring blood, eyes unfocused. The trance that had carried them through the storm now left them weak, sometimes unable to defend themselves. Allies hurried to protect them, knowing that, for all their strength, berserkers were as vulnerable as children once the rage passed. To witness the berserker in battle was to see the human spirit pushed to its limits and beyond. It was to see courage and madness mixed until they could no longer be separated. The shield wall was the pride of northern armies, but against the wild charge of the berserker, it sometimes became a trap. Order turned to chaos, and the old world cracked open, if only for a moment. The lesson was clear, written in terror and broken shields. In the right hands, fury is a weapon, and the line between legend and reality is thinner than anyone dares to believe. If the berserkers were the storm, the Ulfhedner were the silent approach before it. They were the darkness under the trees, the quick breath on a cold night, the feeling that something unseen is watching from the edge of the firelight. While their bear-shirt cousins charged headlong into battle, the wolf-skins became shadows, masters of the hunt, students of patience, and artists of fear. Their legacy is not one of chaos, but of cunning, discipline, and the eerie silence that comes before disaster. The Ulfhedner trained their bodies, but even more, they trained their minds. They studied the ways of wolves, how to stalk, how to blend with the landscape, how to move as one with a pack. Their rituals were quieter than the Berserkers, their transformations more controlled. In old tales, they were said to vanish into the forest, living for days or weeks beyond the edge of civilization, learning to hunt and survive with little more than their wits and their teeth. They tested their senses, learned to read the wind and the tracks in the snow, to hear the softest footsteps or smell the faintest whiff of smoke. When battle came, the Ulfhedner were the knife in the dark, the sudden blow that ended resistance before it began. Unlike the wild, sweeping attacks of the Berserkers, the wolf-skins relied on speed, surprise, and coordination. They crept through the night, circling enemy camps, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sometimes they howled, not in rage but as a signal to their brothers, a coded language that allowed them to attack from many sides at once. To their enemies, it sounded as if the night itself had come alive with hunters. Their role in battle was often to flank or harry, to break the enemy's nerves before the main force arrived. They might slip through weak points in the defenses, set fire to supplies, or drag sentries away in silence. Sometimes their attack never came at all. Just the knowledge that Ulfhedner were near was enough to keep men awake, eyes wide, hands shaking on their weapons. Fear, after all, does its best work in the dark and the unknown. Viking leaders prized the wolf-skins for these qualities. In a world where most men sought strength in numbers, the Ulfhedner thrived on uncertainty. They made their own rules, followed their own codes. Their loyalty was not to a king or a clan, but to the pack, those who shared their trials and their secrets, those who had stood with them under the moon. This made them both valuable and dangerous. Trusted as scouts, used as assassins, sent ahead to soften up the enemy or to sabotage a rival's plans, the wolf-skins could change the course of a campaign without ever drawing a sword in the open. Some old stories say the Ulfhedner could call on the spirit of the wolf at will, becoming something more than human but never losing themselves completely. Where the Berserker risked madness with every frenzy, the wolf-skin was always watching, always thinking, even in the heat of the hunt. Their discipline was as sharp as their teeth, their rage cold and measured. If the bear shirt broke the line by force, the wolf-skin slipped through its cracks, turning strength against itself. Archaeology backs these legends. Stones and helmets show figures draped in wolf pelts, standing apart from the ranks, their eyes set forward, weapons at the ready. In some graves, wolf bones are arranged around human remains as if to mark the bond in death that was forged in life. Some believe these arrangements were meant to protect, to ensure that the warrior's spirit would always have a guide in the next world, a companion on the eternal hunt. For the Norse, the wolf was never just a threat. It was a symbol of freedom, of survival against impossible odds, of cleverness in a world that rewarded the strong and punished the foolish. The Ulfhedner lived this ideal. They did not roar, but watched. They did not charge, but stalked. They waited for weakness, then struck with all the ferocity of the wild. But such power came at a cost. To become a wolf meant stepping outside the bounds of normal life, leaving behind comfort and certainty. Not every man returned from the wild, and those who did were changed. Some never quite fit among ordinary people again, their eyes always turned to the horizon, their minds restless, their loyalties forever to the pack. In the end, the Ulfhedner remind us that not all terror is loud. Sometimes the most frightening enemy is the one you cannot see, the one who does not announce his coming, the one who lives in the spaces between courage and fear. They were the masters of the hunt, and in the cold, dark nights of the north, their legend still lingers, unseen, patient, and waiting for the next hunt to begin. It's easy to be awed by the strength and ferocity of the Berserkers and Ulfhedner, to marvel at how far a human mind and body can be pushed. But every power has its shadow. For all the songs and stories that make heroes of these warriors, there are darker tales, too. Beneath the glory, there is a cost, and sometimes that cost is everything that once made a man human. The old sagas are honest about this. They do not try to hide what happens when the wildness takes over and cannot be put away. The Berserker state, for all its advantages in battle, was not something a man could always control. Some called it a gift from Odin, others whispered it was a curse. The frenzy could come suddenly, even without a fight. A wrong word at a feast, a flash of anger, and the line between friend and enemy would disappear. In those moments, even allies feared the bare shirts. The same rage that shattered enemy lines could turn inward, leading to bloodshed at home. Communities learned to watch these men closely. For every king who welcomed a berserker into his guard, there was a village that kept its children indoors when the wild warriors returned. Some sagas tell of berserkers turned outlaws, wandering the forests, living on the edge, feared by all. The legal codes of Iceland and Norway mention penalties for going berserk, not on the battlefield, but in peacetime. Outlawry was common, sometimes even death. It was a recognition that the power to break men in war could break a society in peace. For the Ulfhedner, the risks were different but no less real. The wolf is not only a symbol of cunning and pack loyalty, it is also a creature apart, a predator that sometimes turns on its own. To live like a wolf meant leaving behind much of what made life safe and predictable. Some who went into the wild did not return, or came back changed, unable to fit into the world of farmers and merchants. They might pace restlessly at the edge of the settlement, or drift from group to group, always searching for the freedom of the hunt and the company of their own kind. Archaeologists have found graves that hint at this outsider status. Some are rich, filled with weapons and amulets, but set apart from the main burial grounds. Others are lonely, marked only by a few stones or a ring of wolf bones. The message is clear. These men were respected and feared, honored and shunned in equal measure. Their power set them apart, and not always in ways they would have chosen. The sagas sometimes tell of berserkers who could not leave their rage behind. After the frenzy faded, they would collapse, weak and lost, unable to remember what they had done. Some were haunted by what they had seen and done in the grip of the battle trance. They became restless, prone to sudden violence or deep melancholy. The world that had needed their strength no longer had a place for them, and they became ghosts in their own land. For those who led these men, kings, jarls, warlords, the challenge was always control. How do you keep the bare shirt's strength but avoid the chaos he brings? Some leaders built strict codes of honor, creating space for ritual and reward. Others tried fear, threat, and exile. Sometimes nothing worked, and the wildness would sweep through a hall or a village, leaving tragedy in its wake. This was the other side of the legendary power, the knowledge that whatever gave a man the courage to fight without fear might also cost him his peace, his place, and his soul. We like to believe that great power is always under control, that a hero can choose when to be wild and when to be calm. But the Vikings knew better. Their stories are full of warnings, of the danger in seeking to become more than human, of the thin line between greatness and destruction. They understood that some gifts are double-edged, that the same flame that lights the way can burn down the house. In the end, the most terrifying thing about the Berserkers and Ulfhedner may not be what they did to their enemies, but what their own power did to them. They remind us that becoming a monster, even for the best of reasons, means risking everything that once made you a person. It is a lesson as old as war and as fresh as today, a shadow that stretches from the mead halls of the north to the battlefields of every age. For in every heart that seeks to break its limits, there is the risk of losing the way back. The sagas sing of many fierce men, but a few rise above the rest, names spoken with awe, fear, and a kind of reluctant respect. These were not myths spun from empty air, but men of flesh and blood whose lives tangled legend with reality. They walked the line between hero and monster, and their stories, recorded by poets and enemies alike, show us how thin that line can be. Take Egil Skallagrimsson, the warrior poet of Iceland. His tale is one of contradiction, a man who could kill with his hands or his words, whose rage matched his wit. From boyhood, Egil was different. He was dark, strong, and stubborn, famous for composing verse before he could lift a sword, infamous for striking down playmates when the mood took him. He came from a line touched by the Berserker fury. His father, Skallagrim, was known for fits of wild strength. The saga tells how Egil would swell with anger before battle, his face twisting, his eyes turning cold as the sea in winter. It was as if he changed shape, becoming more than himself, feared by enemies, unpredictable even among friends. Egil's legend grew on both sides of the sea. He fought in England, defied kings in Norway, and outlived most of his enemies. But what made him truly terrifying was not just his skill in battle, but his mind. He could compose a skaldic poem that stung like a blade or twisted the will of a king. He fought like a berserker, but never lost his sense of himself, never fully surrendered to the rage. For Egil, violence and artistry, madness and reason, were two sides of the same coin, a balance few ever achieve. Then there was Harald Hardrada, whose very name means hard ruler. He is called the last great Viking, a man whose life was an epic of ambition, strength, and restless energy. Harald's story started in defeat, fleeing Norway as a wounded boy after his brother, King Olaf, fell in battle. But exile only sharpened him. He served as a mercenary, a prince, and finally as a commander of the famed Varangian Guard in Byzantium, where his northern fury met the discipline of the East. Harald fought on 3 continents, mastered languages, amassed wealth, and made enemies wherever he went. He brought the cold brilliance of the wolf's skin and the hot rage of the bear shirt into the same body. Harald was both strategist and storm, leading charges with axe in hand, but also plotting and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When he returned to Norway, he seized the throne with a mixture of brute force and cunning. His end came at Stamford Bridge in England, cut down in battle, fighting to the last with a wild strength that had carried him across the world. Even his enemies remembered him as almost superhuman, towering, tireless, a legend come to life. The third is Thorkel the Tall, whose deeds seem too large for any single man. He led the Jomsvikings, a brotherhood of warriors bound by strict rules and unbreakable loyalty. Thorkel was said to stand a head taller than other men, swinging his 2-handed axe with a skill and strength that made lesser warriors flee. He was not just a brute. He was a leader who demanded discipline and courage, and his followers became the most feared mercenaries of the age. Thorkel's story is a tangle of raids and battles, shifting loyalties and cold pragmatism. He fought against the English, then for them, then against them again, always following his own code. He rescued princes, outwitted kings, and turned the tide of more than one battle. What set him apart was not simply his might, but his control. He could unleash violence with a glance, but just as quickly call his men back, reminding them that strength without order is just chaos. Each of these men was terrifying in his own way. Egil, with his volcanic temper and icy mind, could not be predicted or tamed. Harald, blending tactics and wild courage, moved through the world as if it owed him a destiny. Thorkel, master of men and battle, commanded not just by fear, but by the unshakable respect he inspired in those who fought beside him. All three became legends not because they were perfect, but because they embraced their flaws, using rage, ambition, and sometimes even madness as weapons. They did not simply survive their world, they bent it to their will. Their stories show us that the most terrifying warriors were not monsters, but men. Men who learned to walk at the edge, to use the darkness within without falling into it. They remind us that greatness often comes with a price, and that the line between hero and terror is sometimes as thin as a blade in moonlight. In the end, their legends outlasted the battles, echoing through the centuries, a warning and a challenge to anyone who dreams of becoming more than human. Every legend has a shadow. For the Berserkers, Ulfhedner, and the champions who led them, the greatest battles were not always fought with sword or axe. They were fought in the silence that followed, the long, cold hours after the rage faded, when wounds began to ache and memories grew heavy. The price for stepping beyond the edge of human experience was often paid in private, and it was steep. Pain was a constant companion. The same trance that let a berserker or wolf skin ignore wounds in battle could not protect him forever. When the fury passed, the hurt came roaring back. The sagas are full of men who bled without noticing, who stood in victory only to collapse minutes later, pale and shivering. Broken bones, gashes, lost fingers. These were badges of honor, but they were also lifelong burdens. Some wounds never healed right. Some men limped for the rest of their days, hands twisted or jaws set wrong, faces marked by old scars. To be a legend in life meant carrying pain in death. The mind suffered too. Berserkers were known to lose themselves in the heat of the fight, but many never fully found themselves again. There are stories of warriors who awoke from the frenzy confused and weak, unable to remember the battle or even their own names. Some sank into deep melancholy, haunted by images they could not shake, the faces of enemies and friends, the shouts and screams, the blood on their hands. The sagas do not call it trauma, but the wounds are plain. Some men grew silent and brooding. Others turned to drink or wandered the wilds alone, restless and uneasy, as if peace itself had become a stranger. Memory is a tricky thing for those who have touched the limits of human endurance. Some memories fade, replaced by the glory of songs and praise. Others remain sharp as a blade, surfacing in nightmares or quiet moments by the fire. Old warriors sometimes told their tales in bits and pieces, skipping the darkest parts, speaking only of great deeds or impossible odds. But those who listened closely could hear what was left unsaid, the regrets, the fear, the sense that something had been lost and could never be recovered. The communities that celebrated their heroes in public also learned to fear them in private. When the battle was over and the feast was done, who could say if the bear shirt or wolf skin would wake in the night, seized by a rage that had no outlet? Laws were written, stories whispered, and at times, even the greatest warriors were kept at a distance. Their presence was both a blessing and a risk. The same men who could break armies could break homes, friendships, even themselves, when the wildness would not let go. Some found ways to cope. Rituals and bonds of brotherhood helped keep the worst at bay. The sharing of stories, the building of memorials, and the support of fellow warriors could soften the edges of memory. For a few, poetry or quiet work on the land provided a new anchor. Egil Skallagrimsson, for all his ferocity, lived long enough to become a poet and a farmer, his final years spent in reflection and old age. Not all were so lucky. The world changed, and so did the meaning of their scars. As Christianity spread and the laws grew stricter, the old ways became dangerous. The bear shirts and wolf skins were no longer heroes but threats, their rituals outlawed, their stories twisted into warnings. Some faded into legend, Others vanished altogether. Their pain became a lesson. Power, once unleashed, is hard to control, and those who taste its extremes are seldom left untouched. Modern minds may look back and wonder, was it worth it? Did the glory of the shield wall, the terror in the enemy's eyes, balance out the cost? For the warriors themselves, there was rarely a choice. They were made by their world, shaped by need and belief, carried forward by the stories told about them and by them. To survive was to endure, to adapt, and sometimes to pay with everything they had. The story of the most terrifying Viking warriors is, at its heart, a story about limits, how far they can be pushed, what is gained, and what is lost. The pain and memories left behind are a reminder that greatness is never free. Every victory carries its price, and the true cost is often paid in silence, long after the cheers have faded and the stories have grown old. In the hush after battle, when the fires are low and the world seems still, the real struggle begins, between what a man has done and what he must live with forever. All stories change with time, and even the fiercest warriors must one day lay down their arms. The fall of the Berserkers and the Ulfhedner was not sudden, but a slow fading, like mist blown from the shore by a rising sun. Their end did not come in a single battle or from a stronger enemy, but from the quiet turning of the world. What once inspired awe and terror became dangerous, then unwelcome, and finally, impossible. The old faith was the first to give way. Christianity crept into the north, carried by traders, priests, and kings who saw in it a path to peace and power. The gods of the Vikings, once so near and wild, were driven out by crosses and new prayers. Odin, once the patron of berserkers and wolf skins, was now cast as a demon, his gifts seen as curses, his followers as outcasts. The rituals that once connected men to the animal spirits became forbidden, whispered about only in secret. New beliefs did not honor the wildness within. They demanded it be tamed or driven out. Laws soon followed faith. As kingdoms grew and rulers tightened their grip, the berserker was no longer a valued ally, but a threat to order. The very skills that made him valuable in war, his fury, his power to shatter the shield wall, were dangerous in peacetime. Outlawry, once a rare punishment, became common. Iceland's legal codes, and later those of Norway and Denmark, banned the berserker gang. Going wild, even in the name of the gods, was a crime. Communities no longer turned a blind eye to the broken tables and bloodied hands. The world needed stability, not wildness. The art of war itself began to change. Armies grew larger and more disciplined. Archers and cavalry, massed spears and shield formations, left less room for the lone champion or the shock of the wild charge. Iron armor and new tactics made it harder for a single man, no matter how strong or fearless, to turn the tide. Leaders sought loyalty and order, not the unpredictable strength of men who might turn on friend as easily as foe. The berserker, once a weapon to be pointed at the enemy, became a risk that few were willing to take. There was a change, too, in how the stories were told. Earlier sagas spoke of berserkers with a mixture of admiration and fear, part hero, part monster, always larger than life. But as time went on, the tales shifted. Now the berserker was the villain, the troublemaker who had to be put down, the relic of a wilder age. The songs that once praised his fury became warnings to children. Memory is a powerful weapon, and the changing stories did what swords and laws alone could not. They made the berserker into a figure of the past. Archaeology confirms the shift. In older graves, bear claws and wolf teeth lie beside swords and axes. Later, the animal bones vanish, replaced by crosses and the simple tokens of Christian life. Sites once used for ritual are abandoned or built over. The wildness was pushed out, not just from battlefields, but from the imagination of the people themselves. For the men who had lived as berserkers and wolf-skins, there could be no easy path back. Some found places on the margins, mercenaries, wanderers, or outlaws. Others tried to adapt, hiding their power, struggling to fit into a world that had no place for their kind of strength. A few became legends in their own lifetimes, stories told in flickering firelight, warnings or boasts depending on the teller. Change is never simple, and it is never only loss. With the end of the berserkers came new kinds of warriors, soldiers, knights, men bound by law and oath rather than trance and ritual. The north grew quieter, its people safer, but perhaps a little less wild. The shadows where the bare shirts once danced grew empty, and the wolf howls faded from the night. Still, echoes remain. The spirit of the berserker did not vanish completely. It lives on in tales of courage, in moments when ordinary men and women rise beyond themselves, in the hunger for something greater that still stirs in the human heart. The end of the old ways was not the end of the dream. It was only the closing of one chapter, the start of another. The fall of the berserkers is a lesson about power, how it is shaped, how it is feared, and how it must sometimes be set aside for the good of all. But it is also a reminder that what is lost is never truly gone, as long as memory endures and stories are told. In the silence of the northern woods, in the firelit halls of winter, the wildness waits, patient as always, for someone brave enough or desperate enough to call it back. The world of the Vikings changed, but their stories lingered, woven into the memories of those who came after. As the bare shirts and wolf skins faded from battlefields and vanished from the edges of settlements, their legends only grew. Memory, after all, is not just about what happened, but about what people needed to believe. Fear finds new shapes in each generation, and the most terrifying warriors of the North became shadows that walked through history, whispering of the wildness that once lived in every heart. The tales of the berserkers did not die with their passing. Instead, they grew larger, stranger, embroidered by poets, magnified by fear, reshaped by the dreams and nightmares of every new age. The stories moved across the north, traveling with sailors, traders, and wandering bards. They crossed into foreign lands, England, Ireland, the distant courts of Byzantium, where people spoke of monstrous men who felt no pain and tore through armies as if made of smoke and steel. The truth became less important than the effect. A good story needed only a seed of reality to flourish. As centuries turned, the memory of the berserkers changed with each retelling. They became everything an enemy might dread, a man immune to iron, a howling beast, a creature who could not be stopped by reason or blade. The Ulfhedner became the terror in the night, the wolves who moved unseen, who could strike without warning. Their names became curses or prayers, depending on who spoke them. Some saw in these legends a lesson about courage, others a warning about the danger of letting loose what cannot be controlled. Writers and storytellers built upon each other's words. The sagas gave way to chronicles, to history books, to folk tales told at winter firesides. In time, the stories grew so large that they shaped the way people understood their own world. To call someone a berserker was to conjure not just an image, but a feeling, a chill, a shiver, a respect mixed with unease. Fear of the old wildness did not die, but found new forms. It lived in fairy tales of trolls and giants, in the warnings given to children, in the old laws that lingered long after the last wolf's skin was buried. The transformation of these warriors into myth was a kind of survival. Even as Christian priests and new rulers tried to erase the memory of the bare shirts and their rites, the stories slipped through. People remembered in secret, even as they outwardly condemned the old ways. Stories, after all, need only a whisper to live on. They hide in the cracks of daily life, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The fear that the Berserkers inspired became a tool for those who held power. Leaders used the legends to justify new laws and tighter control. Outsiders were called berserk, outlaws or rebels, painted as threats to the peace. In dark times, rumors would spread that the old wildness was returning, that men were once again losing themselves to rage. The past was never quite gone. It could be called up whenever it was needed. For the common folk, the legends provided a way to explain what could not be understood. When disaster struck or violence flared, people might say, "It was the Berserker spirit," or "The wolves have come back." The stories gave shape to fear, made the unknown a little less random. Even if no one had seen a true bear shirt in generations, the memory of what they had been kept the boundaries of society clear. There were rules, and there were stories of what happened when those rules broke. The transformation of flesh and blood warriors into creatures of memory is not unique to the Vikings. Every culture has its monsters, its legends, its heroes who walk on the edge of the possible. But the Norse stories endure because they are honest about the cost of greatness. They remember not just the victories, but the pain, the loneliness, the price paid by those who dared to reach beyond the ordinary. In the end, the memory of the Berserkers and Ulfhedner reminds us that fear is not just an emotion. It is a tool, a weapon, a thread that binds people together and holds them apart. Stories keep old dangers alive, warn the reckless, and inspire the bold. They are a way for a culture to talk to itself across centuries, to remember what it once was, and to dream of what it might be again. The wildness that lived in the hearts of those ancient warriors has not vanished. It has only changed its shape, hiding in words and whispers, waiting for another age that needs its lessons. Myths may fade, but memory, once set loose, cannot be easily caged. The most terrifying Viking warriors in history still live wherever fear and hope meet, wherever someone dares to imagine what lies just beyond the light of the fire. The world has changed almost beyond recognition since the days when berserkers and wolf skins roamed the wild north, but the echoes of their legacy still ripple through time. You can see it in the way people tell stories about warriors and heroes, or in how we sometimes wish for a strength that is bigger than fear, a courage that is wild and untamed. The old spirit is not so easily buried. It survives in our bodies and in the restless corners of our minds. Modern science has searched for answers in the blood and bones of these ancient fighters. Researchers have dug into graves, testing the DNA of those who lived and died by the sword. Some discoveries are ordinary: worn joints, healed fractures, signs of a life spent fighting. Others are strange: unusual bone density, evidence of rapid healing, even hints that some families might have passed down genes for heightened endurance or unusual strength. There is no berserker gene, but there are lines that run deep, a memory of struggle written into flesh. It is not magic, just evolution, but it reminds us that the past is never entirely gone. The idea of the berserker, of becoming more than human in the heat of challenge, finds new life in places far removed from icy fjords or ancient forests. Modern athletes, elite soldiers, and even some artists chase the same altered states. They talk about being in the zone, of losing the sense of time, of moving without thought. In moments of crisis, people lift cars, run through fire, or survive wounds that should have ended them. Doctors call it adrenaline, endorphins, or dissociation. But the feeling is the same. The world narrows, pain vanishes, and something stronger takes over. Military training across the world still echoes the lessons learned by Viking warrior cults. Special forces are pushed past comfort, stripped of sleep, cold, and fear, taught to rely on instinct and brotherhood. Teamwork, ritual, even chanting and music play their part. The goal is not just skill, but the ability to enter that space where normal limits break down. The rage is controlled, the wildness given purpose. There are even new rites of passage, where young fighters are broken down and rebuilt, not so differently from the rituals that once turned men into berserkers. In popular culture, the berserker spirit is everywhere. Movies, comics, and video games draw on the old archetypes: a lone hero, unstoppable in fury, who fights against impossible odds. Audiences cheer for the transformation, even as they fear its cost. From ancient sagas to superhero stories, the line between man and monster remains thin and compelling. There are people today who claim the title for themselves. Some reenact Viking battles, donning bear or wolf skins, testing themselves in staged fights. Others seek out altered states through extreme sports or intense meditation, searching for a glimpse of the old wildness. For some, it is about feeling alive, about touching a strength that modern life does not often demand. Yet, for all the fascination, there is caution too. The old warnings have not disappeared. The stories always ended with a cost: injury, isolation, or a loss that could not be measured. Modern psychology is just as careful, speaking of trauma, burnout, and the dangers of losing touch with ordinary life. The lesson is the same: the wildness inside can be a gift or a curse, and not everyone who seeks it comes back unchanged. There is even debate about whether the legacy is a good thing at all. Is it better to tame ourselves, to build safe, orderly societies where no one ever needs to bite a shield or charge a line alone? Or is there value in remembering that humans were once wild, that the fire inside has not gone out, only changed shape? Some see the Berserker legacy as a source of inspiration, a reminder that we are capable of more than we think. Others see it as a warning, a memory of how easily violence can escape control. In the North, old rituals still echo. There are festivals and gatherings where people remember the stories, not to become wild again, but to understand. They raise a toast to courage, endurance, and the freedom of the forest and sea. The memory of the bear shirts and wolf skins is not only about violence, but about pushing limits, about daring to become something new. At its core, the Berserker legacy is about transformation. It asks whether we can change ourselves, how far we can go, and what we are willing to pay for power. The wildness is not just in the past. It lives in every choice to face fear, every act of strength that surprises even ourselves. The most terrifying Viking warriors are gone, but their spirit survives, tangled up with hope and danger, always calling from the far side of the fire. In every age, we must decide what to do with that call, and what kind of people we want to become. Through the fog of centuries, the line between myth and reality is not always clear. But modern science keeps pushing at the edges, searching for what's real beneath the stories. The Berserkers, the Ulfhedner, and their legendary fury have long been dismissed as fantasy, tales told by frightened monks or wild poets. But archaeology, medicine, and psychology have begun to offer new ways to see these old warriors, and the truth, as always, is more complicated than legend or denial. It starts in the earth, with the bones left behind. Archaeologists sift through ancient graves and settlement layers, turning up weapons, animal pelts, and the heavy bones of men who lived hard lives. They measure arm bones warped by years of swordplay, find healed skulls and broken teeth, sometimes even bits of bear or wolf fur mixed among the grave goods. In Sweden, the famous Torslanda helmet plates show men in animal skins, jaws open in a howl, muscles tensed. In Gotland, stones carved with runes and wild shapes speak of ritual, of belief, of something just beyond what words can hold. Science does not stop at what is buried. Modern doctors and biologists look at the stories of berserker rage and ask what might be possible. They know the human body can do strange things under stress. Endorphins, adrenaline, and other chemicals can block pain, boost strength, and focus the mind so sharply that everything else fades away. In moments of fear or anger, even ordinary people can do things they would never believe possible, lifting heavy weights, running through fire, fighting on after terrible wounds. Psychologists call it dissociation, a splitting away of normal feelings and thought, or flow state, where action becomes automatic and almost effortless. Some think the Vikings learned to trigger this on purpose, through ritual, breath, song, and the shared madness of battle. The Berserkers' trance, they suggest, was not magic but a kind of self-hypnosis, a hacking of the brain's own safety systems. The wildness was not only a gift but a skill, one that could be taught, practiced, and unleashed at will. Other scientists wonder if something more was at work. The old stories speak of mushroom use, especially the red and white Amanita muscaria, which grows across northern forests. Eaten in the right way, it can bring visions, numb the body, and stir wild emotions. Some think the berserkers used it or other herbs before battle to push themselves into a state where pain and fear were distant, and violence came easily. The evidence is hard to prove. Plants rot away, and the old rituals were secret even in their own time, but the pieces fit together, if not perfectly. Genetics is the latest tool in the search for the berserker's secret. Scientists have found hints that some people really are wired differently, quick to anger, able to ignore pain, hungry for adrenaline. Maybe some families in the north carried these traits, passed down like a shadow in the blood. It would not make a man a legend by itself, but mixed with training and belief, it could push him further than most. Yet, science also sees the cost. Modern doctors know what happens when the fight-or-flight system is used too often. The brain and body can pay a heavy price. Memory fades, moods swing, the line between rage and calm blurs. Ancient sagas talk of berserkers who grew weak after battle, who became lost in sadness or could not find peace among ordinary men. Today we call it trauma or post-traumatic stress, but the wounds are the same. What emerges from this meeting of science and saga is not a simple answer. The berserkers were not supermen or monsters, but men who learned to stretch their limits, sometimes at terrible cost. Their world gave them the tools: belief, ritual, brotherhood, and perhaps even the right mix of herbs or genes. Science cannot yet tell us exactly what happened in the mind of a man who bit his shield and charged the line, but it can show us that the old stories are not just fantasy. They are records of what humans can become, for better and for worse, when pushed to the edge. In the end, the truth is as wild and unpredictable as the warriors themselves. It is found not just in graves or labs, but in the questions that still haunt us. How far can we go? What are we capable of when the world demands everything? Science brings us closer, but the saga remains, reminding us that some mysteries are meant to be lived as much as solved. The most terrifying Viking warriors in history were not born of myth alone. They were men, pushed to their limits, whose echoes still stir in the stories we tell and the lives we live. The greatest battles are not always fought with blades or axes. Sometimes, the fiercest struggles happen inside, in the invisible world of thoughts and feelings. This was as true for the Berserkers and Ulfhedner as it is for anyone today. The most terrifying Viking warriors carried their weapons on the outside, but their real power, and sometimes their real torment, lived within their minds. To become something more than human, to turn fear itself into a weapon, is not only a question of muscle or rage, but of psychology. To face fear and survive it is the oldest lesson in the world. The Northmen who went into battle as berserkers or wolf-skins did not banish fear. They learned to master it, to twist it until it became a kind of fuel. In the moments before battle, when most men felt their courage falter, the old rituals took over. The painting of faces, the biting of shields, the chanting of songs, these were not just for show. They worked like armor for the mind, turning terror into focus, anxiety into action. What started as dread became energy, pulsing through the body, driving men forward. The trance that made a berserker so deadly was not simply madness. It was a learned state, built from childhood through ritual, hardship, and belief. From a young age, those destined for the path of the bear shirt or wolf skin were tested, by cold, by pain, by hunger and exhaustion. They were taught to see discomfort as proof of strength, to greet wounds with pride, and to lose themselves in the rhythm of breath and movement. The mind, they discovered, could be trained just as the body could, until ordinary limits faded and something wild moved in their place. This ability to control, or surrender to, powerful emotion is the key to the Berserkers legend. Modern science calls it altered states of consciousness, or flow. Psychologists know that people in these states can achieve feats that seem impossible, fighting through pain, reacting faster than thought, acting with clarity in the midst of chaos. The ancient Vikings found their own way to this place, guided by tradition and a belief in the spirits that moved through them. For them, fear was never the enemy. The real enemy was hesitation, the freeze that could shatter a shield wall or spell doom for a raiding party. But the same strength that made these warriors so effective also held danger. The rituals that prepared them for battle could sometimes make it hard to return to ordinary life. After the fury faded, many struggled to let go. Their minds, sharpened for violence and risk, did not always find peace in quiet times. Some grew restless or haunted, unable to sleep, quick to anger, always half listening for a danger that never came. The same mind that could turn fear into power could also become a prison, trapping them in memories and feelings they could not control. Those who lived around these warriors knew both the gift and the risk. Leaders valued their power, but also feared their unpredictability. Friends and families welcomed their protection, but worried about what might happen if the old fury woke at the wrong time. Laws and customs sprang up to keep the wildness in check, banishing berserkers who lost control, setting boundaries for when the trance could be called upon, and building support among fellow fighters who understood what it meant to walk so close to the edge. The legacy of the berserker mind is not only about violence. It is also about resilience, the ability to survive when others break, to keep moving forward when the world turns dark and cold. This same resilience can be found in people today, whether facing battles of the body or of the spirit. In moments of crisis, humans still find a way to reach deep, to discover strength they did not know they had. The old wisdom remains. The mind is a weapon, and fear can be friend or foe, depending on how it is met. Modern psychology and neuroscience offer new words for the old truths, but the core lesson has not changed. The most terrifying warriors were not fearless, but masters of fear. They learned to call up power from the heart of panic, to ride the wave instead of drowning in it. For all their scars and struggles, they remind us what is possible when the mind is disciplined and the will is strong. Yet, the cost is real. The stories warn us. To touch the wildness inside is to risk losing the way home. Not every warrior found peace after the battle. Some paid with loneliness or madness, or a life spent searching for a fight that never ended. Their psychology was both shield and burden, a gift for the world they were born into, a challenge for the ages that followed. As we remember these warriors, let us see them not only as fighters, but as human beings who faced fear and learned, for a time, to command it. Their journey is not so different from our own. The real battles, then and now, are always fought in the mind, in the place where terror and hope meet, and where, sometimes, the impossible becomes real. As the story draws to its end, the fire burns low, casting long shadows across the walls. The old world has slipped away, but the presence of the berserker lingers, haunting the edges of memory and imagination. These were men who stood at the edge, who dared to become something more than the sum of their parts, who lived, and sometimes died, by the power they found within. They were not monsters, though they became myths. They were not gods, but their courage and wildness once made them seem larger than life. The last shadow of the Berserker spirit is not just in graves or broken swords or runes carved on cold stones. It is in the questions we ask ourselves, the fears we face, the moments when we stand trembling and decide to move forward anyway. It lives in every story of a person who exceeds their own limits, who finds a hidden reserve of strength, who fights for something bigger than themselves. The Viking Age has ended, but the core challenge is unchanged. How much can a human heart bear, and what do we become when we push beyond the ordinary? The legends do not fade because they are only about violence or terror. They last because they speak to something deeper. We recognize ourselves in the struggle, the longing for meaning, the hunger for transformation, the cost of chasing greatness. The Berserker's journey is a mirror. Sometimes it shows us what we might become if we surrender to our wildest selves, for good or for ill. Sometimes it warns us that power without wisdom can break us. Sometimes it inspires us to reach further, to test the boundaries, to believe that more is possible. The world today is quieter, shaped by laws and boundaries that keep most dangers far away. But still, in moments of crisis or joy or pain, the old instincts wake. We cheer for the underdog, admire the bold, remember the stories of those who risked everything. Even the smallest life can echo with the shadow of the old wildness. In every culture, on every continent, there are tales of people who went beyond, who became living legends, who paid a price for the chance to touch something greater than themselves. The Berserker spirit also teaches us about limits. It reminds us that there is a balance between strength and control, between passion and responsibility. The sagas are full of warnings about what happens when power runs unchecked, when rage becomes more important than reason, when a man forgets the ties that bind him to family, clan, or community. The old warriors, for all their might, were still part of something larger, a people, a land, a story that continued long after any one name was forgotten. That is the final lesson of the most terrifying Viking warriors in history. Their story is not only about battlefields and blood, but about what it means to be human, to strive, to risk, to fall and rise again, to hold on to something worth fighting for, even when fear and pain press in on every side, to understand that greatness comes with a cost, and that what we choose to become shapes not just our own fate, but the world around us. Today, you will not find bear shirts raiding coastal monasteries or wolf skins slipping through midnight forests. But the legacy endures, in the courage to speak when silence is safer, in the endurance to keep going when every muscle aches, in the wisdom to guide strength with kindness and restraint. The Berserker spirit is not a thing of the past, but a thread woven through all our lives, waiting to be noticed, tested, and, when the moment comes, called upon. So, as the fire dies and the long night stretches out, ask yourself, what would you do if called to the edge? How would you face your own fears, your own limits? Would you find the Berserker within, not to destroy, but to defend, to endure, to live more fully? The last shadow of the Viking warrior is not a ghost, but a question, a spark that waits for you to answer, in whatever way your own story demands. Thank you for following this journey. If these tales have moved you, inspired you, or left you with new questions, share your thoughts, pass the stories on, and let the old wildness remind you that we are all more than we seem. The age of the Berserker is gone, but its spirit endures, quiet, watching, and forever ready to rise when needed most.